Recently on the channel, I shared an awesome haul of used PC parts. If you haven't checked that video out, I highly recommend it for some context on what I'll be discussing today. In short, I found a few complete gaming systems for very low prices on my local Facebook marketplace. While most of the parts are older and lower end, I got such a good deal that it should be pretty easy for me to flip them for profit. Today, I wanted to start a new flip-up series inspired by other channels where I reinvest my profits to gradually acquire higher-end parts. Since I already have a high-end PC with a 5700 X3D and a 4070 Super, I don't need to upgrade my own system. Instead, over a few uploads, I'll see how far I can flip my way up the PC parts ladder. To kickstart this challenge, I'm giving myself a $100 budget to assemble a PC and make a good profit. I'll be using some of the parts from my recent haul. For just $60, I got two computers. The first system came in a retro XCleo A380BK case and a 400 watt power supply. It included an EVGA P670 FTW motherboard, an i3-2120 CPU, 8GB of DDR3 RAM, and both a 240GB SSD and a 1TB HDD for storage. The second system was a recased Dell Optiplex with an upgraded power supply and graphics card. Unfortunately, the motherboard was faulty, so I couldn't test the i5-3570 CPU. However, the other components, including the RX 570, 6GB of DDR3 RAM, a 500 watt power supply, and both a 480GB and 500GB SSD worked fine. To simplify my parts pool, I made a list of components, starting with a total cost of $60. The first step was to sell off parts I knew I wouldn't be using. I managed to sell the retro PC case and power supply as well as the faulty motherboard and i5-3570 for a total of $35. I probably could have gotten more for these parts if I had been more patient, but I wanted to get them off my hands and start the flipping process knowing my budget. Officially, I'm starting this build with a parts pool and $25 invested into it. The next step is to plan my approach for this first flip. I decided to hold on to the P670 board for a bit longer to find better deals on compatible components. For today's video, I needed to find a motherboard and CPU combo that fit my budget. I decided to go with the i7-4770S and a Gigabyte GA-H81M HD3 motherboard, both of which I found on eBay for very good prices. The i7-4077S costed me just over $25. I've used a 4077S in a previous build, and while it's a lower clocked version of the standard 4770, it doesn't lag too far behind in performance and is often available at a lower price, at least from what I've seen. This 4-core 8-threaded Haswell CPU still offers decent usability for the price in a lower end system. To pair with the i7, I got an H81 motherboard for about $27 on eBay. It's a basic MATX board but looks decent and does the job. The biggest downside of it is that it only has 2 DIMM slots, meaning if I use the RAM I already had, the best I could do is 8GB of system memory. Fortunately, I found a deal for a 16GB HyperX Fury DDR3 kit on Marketplace for only $10. Next, to cool the 4770S, I decided on the Cooler Master i30 CPU cooler, knowing it would do a better job and look a lot nicer than the Intel stock cooler that I already had on hand. I was able to get the cooler used in like new condition from Amazon for $11.55. The main reason I went with the more limited MATX size motherboard was to reuse the Cooler Master Q300L case from my initial haul. This case is simple and compact, perfect for a budget build, even though it doesn't offer many features or extensive cable management options. To power the system, I used the EVGA 500 watt power supply that came with the case. It's a lower tier unit, but for a budget build like this, it will do just fine. For storage, I decided to use the 500GB SSD from my initial haul. While I considered an additional HDD, the hassle of the cable management and mounting was not worth my time, so I'll hold on to it for now. Lastly, I chose the RX 570 as the video card for this build over the 1050 Ti. I made this choice mainly because the RX 570 looks better in the case, and because I plan to do a separate video featuring the 1050 Ti in the near future. The RX 570 is a 4GB version, which still offers decent functionality in a system like this. Despite the recent drop for Polaris driver support, it should remain a viable budget option for a while longer. All in all, after purchasing the additional components for this build, my total cost came to $99.05, which is right within our budget. I aim to sell this i7 system for at least double the build cost, if possible. This would give me a great start to continue flipping and using the components I still have on hand. Before listing the PC, I ran it through some game tests to ensure its functionality and to see what it can handle out of curiosity. To start, I ran GTA 5 at maximum settings in 1080p, resulting in a consistent average of about 60 FPS. There were occasional significant drops and minor artifacting, which eventually cleared up, but overall it performed well at these settings. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I tested the system at native 1080p with the graphics slider set to favor performance, though not at the lowest recommended settings. Texture quality was kept at ultra with other settings at low or medium. The game ran quite well, averaging about 70 FPS with only a few noticeable stutters. For Cyberpunk 2077, I started the testing at 1080p low with FSR quality enabled. The setup resulted in an average of about 45 FPS after a few minutes of driving around Night City. Disabling resolution scaling and running the game at the same settings in native 1080p led to a less stable yet playable result with a drop of about 7 to 10 FPS in most cases. Next, I ran Hogwarts Legacy at 1080p native resolution at the low preset with TAA enabled. Surprisingly, the game ran well with an average FPS in the mid-50s, providing a smooth and stable experience. Lastly, I tested Baldur's Gate 3. After running the game in DX11 and Vulkan, I found that Vulkan was more stable for this system. At 1080p native with the low settings and TAA, I saw a consistent average frame rate in the 40s. The visual output was low quality, but likely still playable enough for those with reasonable expectations. Overall, the PC performed as expected. While it's not capable of handling the newest and most intensive titles, it performs well with several modern and popular older titles. It can also likely handle a good number of esports games very well, even though I did not test any today. When I sell this PC at a reasonable price where the buyer gets a good deal and I make a solid profit, I will then look towards putting together another flip, likely still on the lower end. If you wanted to follow along with the series, give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. If you have any questions or suggestions, drop a comment. Thank you.